Good morning, Colts Nation. Welcome back to an episode of the No Horsing Around podcast, brought to you exclusively by the Lounge Room Network. As always, we're just two dudes talking Colts. We are Steven and Zach, your host. And today, so it's Zach's get. I normally kind of go about saying the different things. I'm passing the baton to Zach, and I'm going to let him introduce our very special guest.
Yeah, man. So, anybody who's ever followed me in the podcast world has always known I've been a big fan of George Bremer. So I just thought, it makes perfect sense to go out and reach out to George and ask him to come on. And he was nice enough to accommodate us this late in the evening. So, George, man, thanks for hopping on tonight.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. And George, I tell you what, man, we're just going to hop right into it, just get going. That's how we always do our podcast. First question, just your initial reactions to Julio Jones. Now he's going to be in the AFC South. Definitely not a Colt, but he's going to be an opponent possibly twice a year now.
Yeah, you look at his history against Indianapolis, it's been tough. His history against most teams has been tough, but especially recently, he's really tore the Colts up the last couple times they played the Falcons. If he's healthy, I think he brings a whole new dynamic to that offense. It's really an all-in move from Tennessee. I think it's obviously a short-term kind of a thing. You don't make this move thinking 4 or 5 years into the future. You're doing this to win a Super Bowl either this year or next year. We'll see how that works out for him. But I think there's probably 32 teams in the NFL that in a vacuum would love to have Julio Jones on the roster.
Yeah, I tell you, one thing I just was really curious to get your thoughts on this. I don't think Chris Ballard was ever like, maybe he did his diligence and he just said, hey, I got to pick up the phone and just see what's going on out there. But this was just the anti-Chris Ballard move. So I know you're in it more than I am. You probably never got the pulse that Chris Ballard was ever going to be a player in something like this, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. And then when you see what the return was, obviously not a ridiculous price by any means that the Titans played. But when you look at what the Colts already have given up for next year, that second round pick in Indianapolis is already going to Philadelphia if it doesn't become a first rounder. So you would have to have worked a deal with the Falcons where they would get either the first or second rounder, whichever one Philadelphia doesn't get. And then you're not picking until the third round. I don't think that's something you're ever going to see Chris Ballard do. We've talked before, you and I. Eventually, he's probably going to jump in. He did a year ago with DeForest Buckner. Eventually, he's going to jump in and make a big splash move, but it's going to be a younger player. Everything he does is with the idea of contending 4, 5, 6, 7 years, not just 1 or 2. I look at free agency and trades with him very similar to the draft. He talks about he wants as many picks as he can, wants to throw as many darts at the board as he can. I think he looks at the same way as roster. He doesn't want to – it's never going to be all in on this season. It's always going to be trying to be a contender and have as many shots at the playoffs as you can, for consecutive years. Very similar to what Bill Polian did when he was here.
Yeah, and I'm curious too because I've gone, with the whole Julio thing. I've caught them a lot of attention because I live in Tennessee. I don't think there's been a lot of Titans talk with suddenly they're Super Bowl contenders. I've kind of come out and said that I don't think this move makes them a Super Bowl contender necessarily because they still have a ton of holes. Where do you think this makes it where they're head and shoulders above the Titans or the Colts? Do you think it's still neck and neck? And then like even today, DraftKings came out and said Colts are still favored to win the division.
Yeah, I don't think it makes them head and shoulders above them at all. I think anyone's going to be happy to add Julio Jones. That's just he's a cheat code in a lot of ways. But he's also getting up there. He's not a young receiver anymore, and receivers are sort of like running backs. That shelf life is generally not that long. That being said, it's going to be a really hard offense to defend now. You always had to deal with Derrick Henry. You've always had to deal with A.J. Brown. Now you've got Julio Jones out there as well. It should make life a lot easier for Ryan Tannehill. But, I think one thing that doesn't get talked about enough, he only played, 9 games last year? He had some injuries. He's got to show that he's healthy. That's first and foremost. And then I do think, too, there's an element here that is going to be interesting to watch of pressure on this offense in general. You've got a new offense coordinator in Tennessee, Arthur Smith obviously moving on, ironically, to the Falcons. Now, I think it's only human nature. You bring in a receiver like Julio Jones, you're going to feel like I've got to use this guy. I've got to make this move matter. Will they throw the ball more often than they have in the past? Will they get away from that bread and butter with Derrick Henry? I don't know. And I don't think any of us will know until the season rolls on. I think every time one of these moves is made, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. From a pure talent standpoint, a terrific move, a move I think Tennessee was necessary for them. They've upgraded the receiver core, but we have no idea what it's going to look like on the field altogether. I go back to 2015 when the Colts got Andre Johnson, and everybody said, it's going to put this offense over the top. You add him to this group. He was never the same Andre Johnson. They never got the guy who played in Houston. You just don't know how these things are going to turn out.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And I think one thing you point out, George, is a really good point. He's got to be on the field to produce, right? Like you can be as good as you want, but he's just not been as healthy here lately. So that the jury's still out on that. I wanted to kind of pivot just into free agency in general. It's late. Normally teams don't do a whole lot late in free agency, but Chris Ballard kind of loves that. I call it, maybe for lack of a better term, dumpster diving. You go in there and find out what you can get, low risk, high reward type of guys. And one position to me, George, that feels like that may not be done yet, possibly a veteran cornerback. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a position. He talked maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had that annual kind of meeting with him, some of the writers, and he talked at that time a little bit about they really like the corners. Obviously, they're happy everywhere, or they wouldn't have the roster they have. If they weren't happy, they would have done more already. But he mentioned that's one spot that they feel like they're going to keep their eyes on. What's out there both now. As we go through the summer, at the end of training camp, you have those cuts. He's always really active then. I think it's going to be a position to watch because you feel like, and Matt Eberflus made reference to this, last week or the week before, whenever he talked, you feel really good with Xavier Rhodes coming off the year that he had a year ago. You feel really good with Kenny Moore, who really probably deserves to be a Pro Bowler. That third spot is wide open. Rock Ya-Sin has obviously got to get some things figured out. He's got to get some technique issues solved. There's ability there, but he's got to take a step. It's year 3. He's no longer a young guy, quote unquote. He's got to make a step forward. Marvell Tell is one of the more intriguing guys on this roster. We don't know what to expect there. He didn't play last year, obviously, opted out. Towards the end of his rookie year, there were some signs that things were moving in the right direction. He's got the length they like. He's got the size they like. He's a big athlete. He's an intriguing guy. TJ Carey did some really good things for this team last year. He's another aging guy, though. What can you really expect from him again this year? And so when you look at that group, I think they're going to give them time early in training camp and early in the nice thing is there's preseason games this year. So you're going to have a chance to see what they're doing on the field. But someone's going to have to emerge. And if they don't, we've seen Ballard do this his whole time here. I mean, was it Mike Mitchell came in at safety, in the middle of the year? He's not afraid to do these things. He's going to go ahead and take a look at this young group and hope somebody emerges, but no one's going to be handed anything. And if they don't, that's definitely a position that they're going to have their eyes on, whether it's trade, free agency, cuts. It's definitely a spot that's not finished, so to speak.
So I've got to ask George, because you brought his name up and it's a point of debate between me and Zach. I like Rock Ya-Sin. I don't like how handsy he is. Obviously, I don't like the penalties. I don't like the game-changing penalties. I have a little bit more faith in him than I think Zach does. Kind of the last 2 weeks with the camps, with the kind of the OTA that they lumped together. What did you see? Do you see some improvement on where he's locking these players up and getting away from it? Do you see the possibility of him taking that step?
Yeah, I mean, really, this spring there was not much to see. I mean, it was really walkthrough speed, and they didn't have like offense against defense. So they're really just kind of lining up and going through play calls, but there wasn't really a lot to lock in on as far as on field goes. But I thought his rookie year, he looked like a guy who was ready to break out. He had a great spring that year. He had a terrific rookie camp that carried on through training camp, and he could never quite bring that onto the field. We never quite saw that guy from practice on game day on the field. And then last year, it was early in the year. It felt like, hey, he's taking a couple steps forward. And then round about midseason, that Green Bay game really stands out. He took the old habits came back, and he had a couple more weeks there where there were really bad game-changing penalties. And so I feel it's not dissimilar in my mind to what we saw with Grover Stewart and Tyquan Lewis. Those guys would have good training camps, and you're thinking any day now it's going to happen. And it took year 3 in both of their cases for them to really kind of put it on the field. And so the question now is Rocky Sin going to do that, or is he going to go the Terrell Basham direction? You never know. You see kind of either or here. And I think he's one of a handful of guys that this is a make or break season. And the thing is, Ballard's told him this. It's not happening in a vacuum. He knows this is it. You've got to go out. You've got to be the guy we drafted, or we're going to move on. That's the message that's been sent to him.
Yeah, George, one thing I wanted to kind of point out, and Stephen alluded to it, that I'm not as big on Rocket as some other players. I just feel like once you get that reputation in the NFL for being that guy that holds, not only are the referees going to kind of be looking for that, but the great quarterbacks and offensive coordinators, they're just going to, and you saw that, they're going to attack that man over and over and over again. Because, a 40-yard pass interference is just as good as a 40-yard completion. It just kills that defense. So I am rooting for him, but I that's why I thought TJ Carey's signing was so vital. I thought you had to do something to kind of hedge your bet on that and say, okay, listen, go out there and compete and win this job. Take it from TJ Carey, who kind of took it over from you last season. But I hope, cornerback, I hope that we maybe go out and get somebody else. A lot of names you hear, Richard Sherman late in the year. To me, I'm curious your thoughts. Richard Sherman doesn't sound like a Chris Ballard guy. I know he has the correlation of Seattle, but aging, a lot like Julio Jones, aging, injury history, all of that stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's not the fit that you would expect, but we're getting into the time of year where he does go kind of outside of his blueprint because the cost is coming down. And now you can maybe bring in a guy at a lower risk, and then he's willing to do some things that he might not ordinarily do. But again, I think a lot of that's going to be determined by Yassine, by TJ Carey, and by Marvell Tell. If one of those three guys can step up, the Colts will be happy and they'll move forward with it. If they don't, then he's going to start looking out there. And if Richard Sherman's still on the market, I'm sure they're going to at least kick the tires. I just think that to me is the one, I won't say necessarily glaring, but the two positions that you really look at and you think if by the end of December they're not where they want to be, you're probably going to point at one of two areas, that cornerback group, and say, well, no one emerged and they got beat by good offenses, or the wide receiver group where there's a lot of potential but not a lot of proven production. In both cases, there's guys they have a lot of faith in. It could go really well if those guys step up. But we've seen, especially with the receiver group in the last couple of years, we've seen that not happen. We've seen guys get injured. We've seen the fears from the preseason borne out into the regular season, and then it looks bad, and everybody rightfully starts pointing fingers. I think those two to me are the ones that you look at, and as a result, they're the two I would expect to watch for cuts, for free agents, for trades, because those are spots that you could use that solid veteran, league average starter type of guy to kind of bring everything up a notch.
Yeah, so kind of sticking with receivers, George. I'm a big fan of Paris Campbell. If he can stay healthy, I think that's the biggest thing. I think when you're looking at make or break seasons, he is potentially probably one of the biggest ones this season. Is that he's got to stay healthy. He's got to stay healthy, and he's got to show why they drafted him so high. Outside of him, who are you looking at kind of in the receiver room that could really maybe take that next step or really break out this season?
Yeah, I agree 100% with Paris Campbell. I think he is he's a perfect fit for this offense. The little bit that we've seen, you see why Frank Reich likes him so much, moving him around, throwing those underneath routes, getting the big plays, but he can't stay on the field. And it's been freak stuff. I think I'd be more concerned with it if it was like hamstrings and nagging things that just kept coming up. It's not. It's somebody like hitting him at such an angle that his leg torques and his knee ends up tearing both ligaments in there or straining them both. It's sort of like bad luck, for lack of a better word. And so how do you fix that? I don't know. He's doing everything on his side of things. He just has not yet. The football gods have not smiled on him. If it does this year, I think you're going to see probably really quickly why they're so high on him. The other guy, it's kind of an obvious pick, but I thought Michael Pittman at the end of the year was really coming on. His game against Buffalo was outstanding. And the Bills, if you go back and look at that, they put White on him the whole game. They understood. And so he's got that respect from opposing defenses already. I think his size, his playmaking ability, I think Carson Wentz is going to use that even more. We saw Philip Rivers. I thought they got the best that they could out of Philip Rivers last year. He played really well. I'm in no way trying to downplay Philip Rivers, but he was 38 years old and he only had so many bullets left in that arm and he knew it. So he was being very specific and very intentional with where he picked those spots. And I think you're going to see Carson Wentz throw more 50-50 balls. I think that's going to lead to more plays for Michael Pittman. I think he's got a chance to break out. And again, he's another guy with bad luck. He was on that track last year early, and then the compartment syndrome in his leg comes out, and who saw that coming? And that puts him back a month, and then you've got to get back into the swing of things. I think he's a guy that they see as a future number one receiver, and you've got to take steps towards that right now. The other guy that no one's really maybe on everyone's radar that they're really excited about, and again, this is walkthrough speed. It's been a rookie mini camp. There's a Deion Kane element here, so take it with a grain of salt. They really like what they've seen from Michael Strawn so far. They thought they were going to get a kid who was extremely raw, who was going to take some time, and what they've seen early, they don't feel that way. They feel like he might be a little bit further ahead than they thought. Obviously, he's got the size that you can't teach. Obviously, he's got extreme athleticism. He was a track star, for goodness sakes. How quickly that can come together, I don't know. And what does that look like in 2021? He's probably not one of the top 3 receivers, but can he be a guy that has a red zone role that they can use as the season goes on and grow that? We'll see. But I think that's another guy that not everybody's talking about him yet, but you hear it every year. There's a name or two that just comes up from the coaches without us asking. And Mike Strawn's name has come up a lot this spring.
Yeah, George, that's a great point. One thing just to kind of touch on, you mentioned, the 2 weeks of the OTAs. It's just basically just a fluff season, so just getting out there, getting familiar with your teammates and your coaches. But just from a physical standpoint, when you saw Carson Wentz out there, did he look sharp? I mean, could you tell that he was a little bit an upgrade at the athletic position at quarterback? What did you kind of see from just what little you could see, George?
Yeah, his arm is as advertised. He can throw it probably 70 yards in the air. I mean, he there's no question about that. He's very – I thought it looked like a weight was lifted off his shoulders. He was very excited out there. You can tell. I mean, you can watch the Instagram, I think it was, the video they put up with Mo Alley Cox, the knockout game. You can see kind of how much fun he's having with his teammates. And I thought that was more than what we saw on the field. What we heard from the players off the field, I thought was the most encouraging. Everybody knows the knocks coming out of Philly, didn't connect with the whole locker room, wasn't coachable. We've heard that all spring long. It hasn't shown itself yet in Indianapolis. We'll see. He hasn't thrown a pick yet. He hasn't been sacked. They haven't lost the game. There's a lot of things down the road, adversity to face, and we'll see how that responds. But every player to a man talked about what a great guy he is, but also that he wasn't just connecting with them on a really surface basic level. He was asking about their families. Do they have a wife? Do they have children? Trying to make those kind of bonds that should pay off on Sundays. To me, from a fan standpoint, that's what I would be most excited about this spring. We'll see what he does. Obviously, he's going to have to go out and play, and that's first and foremost. But to see him taking on those leadership roles, being comfortable with his teammates, really, that's good early signs. It's things we heard about Philip Rivers early last year, and you saw they had trouble early in the year. That Cleveland game was a disaster, and yet they were able to kind of come back and regroup and finish strong. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that Philip Rivers immediately came in and got that trust and got the bond from the entire huddle. It sounds like Carson Wentz is going down that road, and we'll see if that continues.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback, that was going to be something I was curious about is less of the on-field kind of you've had a chance to speak with him, to see how he's carried himself since he's been in Indy. And I mean, I would agree. I mean, I've looked at the videos. We've seen the game of knockout, and just he looks so happy. And then I think he stayed for the rookie week too. What has been your overall kind of impressions of him as someone who sits down and is able to talk with him, kind of as a member of the media, uh, compared to what we heard coming out of Philadelphia?
Yeah, I'm going to throw this name out there, and then everyone's going to go crazy, but he reminds me of Andrew Luck from a media standpoint. The way that he deals with the media, it's very similar. It's very professional, but it's also not, Philip Rivers was probably the most interesting quarterback I've ever been around, in the sense that it felt like you were talking to like your buddy in the living room. He was just a football fan first and foremost. And he would often, like 4 o'clock games, he would know the next opponent's result already. When we were talking to him about, oh, you've got Cleveland next week or whoever, they beat Baltimore this week. And then, he'd start rattling off stats and things. Like, it was insane. And I think with Luck, it was always, there's this humility kind of underneath everything. He was obviously a huge star. He obviously got more attention than everybody, but he was always trying to deflect things and talk more about his teammates. And I've seen that early on from Carson Wentz, that sense of, it's not about me, it's about us, and just even his cadence, the way he speaks, is similar to Luck. And I think the most important aspect of this whole thing for this whole season is going to be his relationship with Frank Reich. Those two guys have connected on a personal level, going all the way back to Carson's time at North Dakota State. And that's obvious in the media interactions. The respect he has for Frank Reich, the personal relationship that they have. I think that's why you see him being so confident, being so excited about being around his teammates. This is where he wanted to be. That's not a huge secret. I don't think anybody's, not aware of the fact that Carson wanted to be in Indianapolis. And the reason is Frank Reich. And I think that relationship, they feel like, Chris Ballard feels like, Reich's one of the handful of coaches that you can give him any quarterback in the league, and he's going to get the best version of that quarterback. And I think with Wentz, you take it a step further because of that personal relationship. Wentz knows from personal experience what Reich's telling him will work. There's no reason to question it. He has best season by far with Frank Reich in his ear. So that relationship to me is the key of the entire 2021 season for this team.
Yeah, one thing, George, and I've said this on multiple podcasts, one thing that kind of stood out to me about Frank Reich when talking about Carson Wentz, he said we don't need him to be special all the time. We just need him to make the right football play. We're not going to require him to make these just crazy backyard. We're going to try to put him in a better position to not turn the football over, make the right football play. Hey, if you just need to hand the football off to win the game, put him in a little bit better mind frame to actually win football games. So it should be interesting. That marriage just makes a lot of sense. And it really just shows how much that Chris Ballard values Frank Reich's opinion on this. I mean, that's a big leap. When you make this type of investment in a guy, Chris Ballard, his words, great quarterbacks don't get traded. He said that, but he still trusted, Frank Reich's relationship. And he said, hey, what do we got here? He went out and got him that tool to maybe take the next step. So that's going to be an incredible narrative as the season goes. I want to kind of pivot into a lot of talk about Zach Ertz. I know there's an obvious correlation with the guys playing. Is there any, you get the sense that there's any real chance that he comes there, or is that just kind of a let's wait and see type of approach? Maybe later on as the offseason goes, maybe we nab him if the money works out and he gets released, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I think it would have to be the release or a draft pick that's just inconsequential, like a 7th rounder, a 6th rounder, something that just isn't going to be missed. there's interest. There's no question about that for the obvious reasons. Ertz as well has that relationship with both Wentz and Frank Reich. Everything you hear about him is leadership and his ability to come in the locker room. But they drafted Kylan Granson. They feel really good about him. They think he's going to fill that Trey Burton role on this team. We know that Frank Reich will play multiple tight ends. I don't think it's out of the question that they would add a fourth tight end to that group. But it's going to have to come at the right time and the right cost. If somebody else blows the Eagles out of the water, you're not going to see Chris Ballard get in a bidding war here. If Ertz is released and somebody else offers him more money, it's going to have to be a situation where, sort of like Carson Wentz, Zach Ertz wants to be here, and the cost is perfect across the board. There's obvious reason to make that connection. I mean, I think everybody sees that. And I think even with Jack Doyle and Mo Alley Cox and Kylan Granson on the roster, there's a place for Zach Ertz if everything else works out. But it's going to be a classic Chris Ballard move. He's going to wait it out. It'll be very similar to the way it worked out with Wentz, where you saw him, this is my offer. I'm not budging. It's going to stay right here. And eventually it came around to the Eagles making that deal. I think he's going to do the same thing now. He'll wait it out if they release him. That's the most likely scenario. If it's a trade, it's going to have to be, either, like I said, really low draft compensation or a depth situation where they can trade somebody at a position they're really deep and make a player for player swap. I don't know if that's realistic, but I think that's the only way it happens.
Yeah, obviously. So I kind of to pivot again, we've talked about Carson because that's the big move this offseason. But the other big move that we discussed a lot is Eric Fisher. We don't see a lot. What are you kind of hearing? Have you heard anything about how his rehab is actually going? I know they're really tight-lipped with it, but is he on? Have you heard? Is he on schedule? Because we've had a lot of debates on our show on how many games we think he's actually going to miss, and no one really knows on where he's sitting. Obviously, they're comfortable where it is, but I'm just curious what maybe you've been hearing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things where you got the caveat with this always is it changes. I think everybody with this franchise is well aware of how many curves in the road these rehabs can take. But right now there's a lot of optimism. They feel like he's on schedule, maybe a little ahead. No one is putting a timetable very deliberately. No one's putting a timetable out there because they don't want to feel like rushing him, into a certain spot. But the feeling that I get, and it's just me, this is not coming from direct knowledge or, any statement. No one has put a date on anything. And I think they're not going to do that for those reasons that we just mentioned. But the feeling I get is October is a likely spot that maybe he misses 3 games on the low end, maybe 5 on the high end. And they're thinking if that's the case, you're going to have him in a 17-game season for 12 to 14 games. It's well worth the risk. And this is a guy, it's sort of very similar in a lot of ways to the Wentz situation, where it's Chris Ballard who has the long history with him. He was out there in Kansas City when they took him number 1 overall. He was with him there for 4 years. And there's a lot of trust between those two. I think Fisher mentioned he's a Midwest guy, grew up in Michigan, went to college, obviously in Central Michigan. He spent his whole pro career so far out in Kansas City. It feels like home to him already coming to Indianapolis. I think his wife's family's from somewhere near, I think maybe Kentucky, somewhere near in the area. And so it's another one of those kind of natural fits. But now with Wentz, the question is, can he get back physically to where he was? Even 2019 would be good enough for this team right now. And 2017 would obviously put him over the top. With Fisher, it's how early. I don't think there's much question he's going to come back, at least internally right now. There's not much question he's going to come back. He's going to play at a high level. It's just, is that midseason? Is it during the first month of the season? And that's going to tell a lot, because after the Carson Wentz storyline, the next big storyline with this team is how many games does Sam Tevi start and how well can they cover up for him? I go back to, was it 2018, I think, when Carson Wentz, Anthony Costanzo had the hamstring injury. I think he missed the first 5 games. They went 1-4. He came back. The first week back is that disaster against the Jets. Then after that, you saw the offense catch fire and you saw it change. When Costanzo was out, there was a lot of quick passes, very similar to last year, honestly, with Rivers. Get the ball out fast, rely on Luck's pre-snap reads. As soon as Costanzo came back, they opened it up, go deep to T.Y. Hilton. The offense changed. I think the difference this year is they've got a veteran Marlon Mack, and they've got Jonathan Taylor, who absolutely looks like a superstar after his rookie year. You can lean on that running game a lot more than they were able to early in 2018. Mack was hurt during that stretch too. He missed some of those same games Costanzo did. But that's the whole question. Can you, the other four starters, the tight ends, the running backs chipping, that running game, can you do enough to get by with Sam Tevi for a while? But that's, everybody knows that has a shelf life, and there's going to be a big difference. If Sam Tevi starts 3 games and if he starts 8 or 9 games, I think it's going to be a major shift in what this team's final record is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I think that the Colts have to feel pretty good about him to give him the type of contract they gave him for 1 year. You feel like, I think the one thing, George, that I'm not so sure about, and maybe it's not even been ironed out yet, is are we going to have a normal PUP list this year? Is that going to go back into place? Has the NFL announced anything like that? Are we going to do COVID rules where you can just kind of come back when you want? Have you heard anything about that?
I think it's still being negotiated. And that's one of the interesting things about this year. Jim Irsay kind of mentioned it's going to be a little bit like 2020 and a little bit like 2022. You're kind of in that middle ground now. And there was a lot of debate. I think I just recently saw that they're going to keep the 16-man practice squad, which is a big deal around here because we know Ballard loves to churn that practice squad and he'll bring guys in and it basically is in-season tryouts. He'll probably use 24 to 30 guys in that 16-man practice squad. And the way the IR works is going to be important in all this because it makes a big difference with a guy like Eric Fisher. You could put him on IR early in the year, and if it's still a 3-week thing like it was last year, and if everybody can come back like he did last year, that's a no-brainer. Boom, you do it. He's back in week 4 at the earliest, and you're ready to go. If you're back to the old 6-week rule and it's only 2 guys, or I think there was some talk that it might go to 3, you still have to kind of do that math in your head. Do you want to take up one of those spots? It does make a big difference in this situation because that's an extra roster spot. If you put him on IR, now you maybe you keep another tackle and you've got that depth in case Tevi struggles, or as we saw last year, there's injuries at the position across the board. And everybody remembers the Pittsburgh game and what happened that day. You may need those guys. So can you do the IR? Can you not? That's going to be another, and all of that is still, we saw it throughout the spring. Some teams didn't really do OTAs. They only came in this time of year for mini camp. The Colts did OTAs, but no mini camp. It's still, there's a lot of negotiations going on. Hopefully that'll get done pretty soon. I'm sure it'll be done by the time teams go to training camp, but those are the kind of like little details that really play into the season because they can change a lot of things. Imagine if like Jamarcus Webb hadn't been on the roster when they played Pittsburgh. Things were bad enough as they were, but you would have had a tight end or a guard or somebody else playing tackle that day because it would have run out of bodies. The IR allowed them to have that spot. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And I'm not sure when that determination is going to be made.
Yeah, man, it'll be very interesting. Wanted to change directions. Rookies every year. I think every team, no matter what, when they have a draft, they're high five and they say this is the year, put us over the top. But you get the sense, though, maybe not the flashiest draft that we'll ever have, but internally they feel really good about where they're at. And I don't think that that's, hyperbole. I think that's real. I think that's coming from a place that Ballard, I think he even mentioned that, hell, we thought about Dio. It was good enough to be a first-round pick. You know what I mean? They were worried they were going to lose him. That being said, just your overall just kind of summary of how you feel about the Colts rookie class.
Yeah, first of all, I think Kwity Paye is one of the most important guys on the roster, especially now that Julio Jones is in Tennessee, because the way to combat that team now is going to be pass rush. You're not going to guard AJ Brown and Julio Jones for very long. You're going to have to force that ball out early, get some sacks, force some turnovers. And I think Kwity Paye, his ability to put pressure on the quarterbacks with no Justin Houston and no Denico Autry. And, there's a lot still that they're really high on Kamoko Toure. We'll see how that turns out. He hasn't been healthy yet. There's some feeling that he is this year, but we'll see where that goes. I just feel like Kwity Paye is a guy that's got to come in and be a double-digit sack guy if this defense is going to get to where it wants to get. They did not think he'd be there at 21. They were pleasantly surprised by that. And they love him all across the board. We've talked a lot about the off-field stuff. His character played a really big role in this. They feel like he was a top 10 talent on the field, but they also feel like this is a guy, his story is pretty well known by now. His mom, fleeing the Civil War. He's born in a refugee camp, pretty much just pulls himself up by his bootstraps, gets himself into Michigan. His ability to work and to deal with adversity, they love everything about him, his entire makeup. We'll see what he can do. I think he's one of the most important guys on the roster. When it comes to Dayo Odeyingbo, I have not heard Chris Ballard talk about a second-round pick like this since Darius Leonard. We'll see what happens. Obviously, he's got a major injury dealing with, just like Eric Fisher. They feel like he'll play at some point this year, but will you get the full Dayo Odeyingbo this year? That who knows? That's going to be something that remains to be seen. But they feel like he's a guy. His body's very similar to DeForest Buckner. He's huge. I can tell you that from being out there. He is huge. But imagine Buckner playing defensive end on the edge because of his athleticism. And I think they feel like he's a game changer. And they felt like his value was such that even if you don't see the full return of that until 2022, it's worth it, because from that point on, they feel like he's going to be a superstar in this league. And we'll see. I remember the way Ballard talked about Darius Leonard when they drafted him in 2018, and it's the same thing with Odeyingbo now. So we'll see how that all plays out. The other guy that we talked about a minute ago, Granson, they're really high on him. They just feel like he really fits what they want to do in the way that Paris Campbell does. It's a lower version of it, obviously, and that's why he's a fourth rounder, not a first rounder, second rounder. But they see him as a more athletic version of Trey Burton. And we saw Burton was able to do a lot of different things. He wasn't healthy as much as they would like him to have been last year, but when he was on the field, he was able to do a lot of things. I think he scored touchdowns rushing and receiving. I think they see Granson in kind of that same way. He may line up in the backfield as a fullback from time to time. He's going to be a slot receiver in certain situations. They really feel like he's an advanced receiving tight end, and he's going to take this offense to another level. And then we'll see what happens with some other guys. I think Ellinger's an interesting guy from the standpoint of not so much this year, but down the road, can he force his way onto the roster? Can he be a Taysom Hill type of guy? Do you even need that? We saw them kind of experiment with that with Jacoby Brissett last year. Is that something they want to bring more into the offense? Let him come in and run those RPOs and just the difference is Phillip Rivers was a statue, and you don't have that with Carson Wentz. He's going to be able to do a lot of those things himself. So do you even need that element? We'll see. But they feel like he's a leader too. And I think they feel like he's a guy that can impact the roster without being on the field. Just his presence there, pushing Jacob Eason, seeing things on the field as kind of a coach, an extra coach. I think they feel like he's going to be an impact there. We'll see. And I don't even know if he'll make the team. There's going to be a lot of competition there. So we'll see. And Strawn's just a very interesting guy. I mean, his dominance at his level of college football was very impressive. His numbers are off the charts, and he didn't even get a junior year because of the pandemic. His size, his speed, I would imagine all eyes are going to be on him this preseason to see what he does. And just about anything you get from him this year is going to be a bonus.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about Strong, because he is totally somebody, like I mentioned to Zach, that I really liked his measurables and everything. And last week got a really great opportunity. I got to actually talk with him in one of the media availabilities, and just super humble guy too, really humble. So, I asked a question to him about what he did during the pandemic, and he was just kept working, and just a really, really good guy. So looking at the different picks, with Kwity, obviously Dio's not going to see the field for a little while, and Granson, and all across that, who do you see probably having the most immediate impact? Whether that's who they're game planning to have it, they put him in the position for it, or just that's who's going to break out.
It better be Paye. I mean, as much as they have invested in him as far as his role. I mean, it's not often in the Ballard era. It happened with Darius Leonard. I can't think of too many more rookies that came in and they had the starting job from day one. A lot of times they run two fields during training camp and during this time of year. And a lot of times, even Paris Campbell and Rocky Sin, who had great rookie camps and got off to fast starts, they were still on that backfield, the second team, over there with the other rookies and the depth guys. Kwity Paye so far has been, boom, he's a starting right end. It's just done. And I don't know, we'll see how that plays out. Training camp changes a lot of things. You put the pads on, obviously. There's not a lot of competition yet, but there is so much invested in him, and he's been given this starting role more or less. There's competition. He won't be handed it. I don't mean it that way. He can be beaten out in training camp, but they don't start rookies out at the top of the depth chart very often at all. And Kwity Paye is there. So I think he has got to do that. I think if there's a surprise, a guy who hasn't been talked about much at all in this class, that Ballard seems high on and Jim Irsay seems high on, is Sean Davis, the safety from Florida. We've seen them do a lot of things with three safeties over the years. I think they might try some of that with him. They feel like he's a real physical, heavy hitter type of guy. I think they see him a little bit like Clayton Geathers in terms of coming in and bringing that sort of intimidation factor. I don't know how much of that's going to happen early, but I think he's a guy that, as the year goes on, might find himself more and more in the rotation. And one of the more interesting things I heard about him this spring came from James Rowe, and not James Rowe, Alan Williams, who was here, for a while. He said, from a classroom standpoint, when they were still just doing the Zoom work, this kid was much like Kari Willis, and they raved about Kari Willis as a rookie, his ability to take that classwork and bring it onto the field, pick up on the defense, high football intelligence. They see the same thing with Sean Davis. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. He's another guy. This praise is great this time of year. You got to go out on the field and do it.
Yeah, George, I think it's going to be very interesting just to see how this all shakes out. But before we let you go, just kind of wanted to get your idea of what you feel like, expectations, reasonable expectations for the Indianapolis Colts this year. Do they take the next step? Are they much the same? Or where are you at with them?
Yeah, to me, it's got to be – the baseline's got to be where they ended last year. I mean, you go 11-5, and obviously that would have to be 12-5 this year. You tie for the division championship. You lose it on the tiebreaker, obviously. I think you've got to feel like you're right there. They went into Buffalo. They've got the ball in the fourth quarter with a chance to win the game. That's a legit Bills team. I think we all agree with that. That's an AFC championship contending Buffalo team. They went in there in January and went toe-to-toe with them. If a couple plays go their direction, if Isaiah Rodgers, who's another guy I didn't mention, he's in that cornerback mix too. I think he's somebody to keep an eye on. They really like what he did in that Buffalo game in sort of emergency type of situation. It'll be interesting to see if he can take a step forward. If he holds on to that interception, it was a hard one. I'm not saying he should have caught it. He holds on to that interception. They don't score at the end of the first half. That's a different football game, and to me, you look at that, things have changed. This roster is a lot different, but that's the bare minimum expectation. They should be in contention to win the AFC South throughout the entire season, and they should be a team that's going to be a tough out in the playoffs. You don't want to go out in the first round. You'd rather have a home playoff game than a road playoff game. There are things that happened during the year last year, that Pittsburgh game in particular, that kind of led them into this, into the situation they got in. But to me, 12 or 11 wins, making the playoffs, that should be the bare minimum expectation. And they're talking big. This is a team that is talking about competing for a Super Bowl this year. There's a lot of things that have to go right to make that happen, but it's also not a crazy, insane dream. There are pieces in place that make that a possibility. It's just you've got to, and we checked off a lot of them, during this podcast. You got to get it. The real Carson Wentz. Kwity Paye's got to come out and be that guy. Someone has to emerge at receiver. Someone has to emerge at corner. If those things happen, this could be a very, very good football team. And I don't think anything less than division title contention and making the playoffs. I don't think anything less than that's going to be acceptable this year.
Yeah, man, I think you're exactly right when it comes to that. But, it's going to be an exciting season just for you, George. They're going to keep you busy. Great narratives, great storylines all season long. And before we let you go, on behalf of me and Steven, we just want to thank you, man, for hopping on here. We're just two guys talking Colts football, and this is something we just love, and it's our passion to do. So it means a lot for you to take time out of your busy schedule to hop on, man. Thank you so much, George.
My pleasure. Anytime, guys. Anytime.
Absolutely, man. You take care, JB.
Thanks. You too.
Uh-huh.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. You good, Steve?
Yeah, we're good, man. We're still going too. So obviously, great interview with George. Shout out to Zach, because Zach has created the ability for us to say George Bremer is a friend to the show. So that's awesome for us. So we want to do a little bit of social media session, but really quickly before we do it, I'm going to lean back too, because I got my merch today too, man.
Got that.
I got it. And hey, shout out too. Okay, so I want to give a huge shout out to the website. So my shirt came in and I was really excited, and it's a touch tight. I immediately contacted them, and not only are they sending me a new one, they're like, you can keep the old one. So now my daughter has her very first No Horse and shirt too. So if you get a little confused on the sizes, if you're unsure of it, they're really, really good with that. Hit the link tree, go to it, have at it. There's all sorts of fun stuff there. My car decal, you guys will see a picture, I believe, tomorrow. For some reason, that has decided to come in separately from my shirt. But, oh, yes, the merch is here. We're all very excited. It looks great. So social media is powered by One Call Technology, you guys. As always, One Call Technology is a leading telecommunications provider. It's a family-run business with over 100 years of experience. They do carrier services, hosted phone services, phone systems. If you think you're paying too much on your bill and you want someone to look to it for free, go to onecalltech.com, hit them up. I work there. You'll probably get me. I'll see what I can do. So social media sessions, before we dive into the questions, because, last week, Zach, we had a ton of questions about what do we need to do to bring Julio. Obviously, we did not have a breaking episode because Julio is in Tennessee now. I just want to, we talked a little with George about it. Just really quickly, what are your actual thoughts on Julio in Tennessee?
First knee-jerk reaction, it's real easy for people to say, Ballard dropped the ball, that they're going to be contenders. They were already contenders, man. I mean, they were a good football team. As much as everybody who's listening to this podcast knows, I can't stand Tennessee Titans. They're still a contending football team, well coached, a solid football team. But what I would say is this, A, he's got to be healthy. B, the Titans still have to be able to stop other teams from scoring, right? Like you can go out there and do whatever you need to do, but you can't go out there and give up 35, 40 points a game to really elite offenses. Julio's not going to matter in those moments. So we'll see. I'm not going to be the type of a homer fan that says, oh, no, it's not going to be a big deal. It is a big deal. He's a very good player. I think the biggest question mark I would have had with Julio is just, can his body hold up, man? He has such a big, freakish athletic frame, and he plays reckless. That's his style. That's what makes him such an amazing, iconic, generational type of wide receiver. But when you get to a certain age, your body can't quite do that and respond the same way the next day. We'll see. It'll be a great challenge. I love Darius Leonard's, coming out and saying, hey, good luck, best of luck to you. But I love the challenge. That's what you want in your leader. You want a guy to come and say, hey, man, bring it on. I'm ready for the challenge. I'm ready. Challenge accepted. And that's from the number one guy and the biggest voice on your defensive side. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll say is I've it's been well documented for me since the trade happened that I have been poking and prodding on your behalf in the state of Tennessee, because I can stick the flag down here for you. That I have said, and I've said it in a way, the move alone doesn't make the Titans a playoff team. It helps, but like you said too, he doesn't play D end, he doesn't play linebacker, he doesn't play cornerback. So I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see. But I just want to get your feelings on that. So let's jump in. We're going to just do a couple of questions because we wanted to have. we wanted to give as much time to George as possible. So we're only going to hit a couple of questions tonight because, like I said, George was great. Like George was fantastic. If you don't
Yeah,
follow him on Twitter, you need to go do it. Like George is fantastic.
exactly.
So the first question we got is from Hunter Clare. And it's an interesting one to me is Frank Reich on the hot seat a little? Ballard has been drafting great, but Frank nor Ballard have, and I don't know why this is a confusing one. They said he doesn't have a playoff win. We do know Frank does have a playoff win, but he only has one. Do you think let's kind of reshape just a touch if they stumble this year? If they don't live up to what the expectation is, which was what George said too, is kind of what me and you have said, that 11 to 12. I mean, obviously, me and you had more wins, but if they stumble, is Frank actually going to be? Do you view him kind of on a hot seat going into the following year?
So the answer is no. And I would say this, and this is maybe not going to be popular, but I would say if anybody would be on a hot seat, and I don't believe either one of them is going to be on a hot seat. I think Ballard would be on a hotter seat than Frank Reich personally, just because
Ooh.
Frank's the coach, right? Frank's the coach. He doesn't go out and get the players, and Frank has had to kind of go through transitions with Jacoby Brissett as your starting quarterback. He's taken some lumps. You got Frank Reich, you got Chris Ballard thinking that they're going to have Andrew Luck for the next 10 or 12 years. And then all of a sudden this guy retires in a preseason game and then your world's turned upside down. And how do you respond? I don't think, honestly, either one of them is going to be on a hot seat. I think they're both Jim Irsay loves them. I think they have a great working relationship. And it looks to me that if they both want to be in Indianapolis, then the Irsay family wants them to be in Indianapolis for a very long time. And I think the fans would also have the sentiment of that as well. I think they're the right people in the right position to put us, hoisting that Lombardi trophy again. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be this year, next year, when it's going to be. But if you told me Frank Reich and Chris Ballard are a part of this organization for the next 10 years, I would tell you that we will, in fact, hoist a Lombardi trophy. I don't know when and where, and I don't know why, but I think they're just that good. And I think it will happen eventually, sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% with you too, because, it's already been documented too. Irsay's already come out and said Ballard's getting an extension at some point this offseason. Like, we know that's coming. And Frank is like beloved by that locker room. I mean, his quotes hang in the building. Now, granted, a lot of coaches, that happens, but his opinion too weighs so heavy, and his thoughts are so highly considered that I just don't see it. And then you look, like you said too, look at the hand that's been dealt for Frank too. Fourth different starting quarterback in 4 years. He has a winning record as a head coach. He's been to the playoffs twice. He's won a game. I just don't see it. I don't think. I mean, if Irsay gave Gregson and Pagano as much time as he did, Ballard's not going anywhere. I mean, we've both said it too. I think Ballard, if he's not the best GM in the NFL, top 3,
Sure,
in my opinion. And that's definitely been something I've butt heads with all the time with the whole John Robinson in Tennessee. So next one up is from Billy England. And I'm going to kind of rephrase how he said it. But how fast can Eric Fisher and Carson Wentz work? So kind of rephrasing and twisting just a little bit, Billy, is like, I would look at it and go, with the lack of snaps that they're going to get together until the season starts, how quickly until they're probably up to speed where Carson knows how long he has? Like, how long do you think it takes for them to kind of gel in with each other?
I don't think it takes very long, honestly. I mean, you're talking about two veterans, guys that know the terminology, the verbiage, just in general of the NFL. Obviously, Eric Fisher's never played under Frank Reich, but he's just a vet. A left tackle is a left tackle. He's just going to have to get familiar with the way that, Carson wants to slide coverages or ask for protection. I tell you, I don't think it's going to take long at all. Probably have to knock the rust off a couple of weeks. I truly believe that. But other than that, I think Eric Fisher will be up and running pretty fast. I think that'll be smooth sailing. I'm more worried about Fisher's body holding up than actually him playing well and at a very high level, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement. I mean, for me, it might be different if we were talking about the center position as opposed to the left tackle because you really have to have that cohesiveness and practice snaps. I mean, sometimes they can be too low through the legs, all these different things, but it is a left tackle, and they're both highly talented. I mean, whatever you want to say about him in Philly last year, highly talented. So, last one that we're going to touch on is Daniel Rascon. And his question is, can we get the old Carson Wentz back? And my piggyback on this question is, what is more likely, 2017 or 2018-19 Carson Wentz?
Okay. So I'll answer it in reverse order. So probably 18-19 Carson Wentz would be my question. I just think that 17, for me, I would need to see more. And I just think sometimes quarterbacks just have that magical season. If you play 10, 12, 15 years and you're lucky enough to play in the NFL that long, there's going to be that one magical season that you have. Now, unfortunately, he had that injury and it didn't work out, but that was a good, well-constructed football team as well. I think Carson will be a really good quarterback. I don't know that I don't know if I'm ever going to get to the point where Carson's considered to be like the elite quarterback in the NFL, but I don't know that we need him. I always feel like if Carson can be somewhere between 7, 8, 9, right there in that sweet spot in the NFL, I think when we have a guy who can win a Super Bowl, then you have to have him inside the top 10 in every year. It can't just be a 1 year, a one-trick pony. He has to be consistent every single year, and that's the big deal. Like, come out, play good every single season and just kind of build on that. But I think he's going to be a really, really good quarterback for the Colts. I honestly do, Steven. I mean, I think he's going to do some special things here, and I think you're going to see Carson Wentz hopefully in his first playoff football game as an Indianapolis Colts quarterback this year.
See, and I love, for those who haven't listened, go back a couple, I think it was last week, and listen, I love the comparison, the comp you made, because you made the comp of
Palmer.
Yes, Carson Palmer. I had Carson in my head, Carson Palmer, and then Ryan Tannehill, which in my opinion, if you're looking, even during their really, really good seasons, they probably weren't considered elite quarterbacks, but they've played at elite levels sometimes. I thought about that like all week. It's like I loved that comp. I honestly think I was thinking about it today. I was like, that it's such a good comp for him to where you can, and I agree wholeheartedly too. You play long enough, you have that spike where you can have that one magical season, that one just mind altering season. It doesn't really mean you're ever going to repeat it. I mean, in my opinion, it's like you look at Lamar Jackson. I don't know if he's ever going to repeat his MVP season. It doesn't mean he's a bad quarterback or he's not going to be a decent starting quarterback, but I don't think he'll ever get back to that. So, I mean, and me and you have been on record too. You don't need 2017 Carson Wentz. You want that 18-19 where he played well, but he doesn't have to be the MVP. He has to make, I think you've said it, just make the right choices is the biggest thing. So, I mean, I'm in agreement. I'm also a homer though, because I've 100% believe that he's going to have a fantastic season. I mean, I think I told you earlier, I was on Eagles Unfiltered right before we came on, which is a Philadelphia Eagles podcast for those who don't catch the Eagles part, with a friend of mine, Kelly Green. And we talked a little bit about him. And I'm such a homer. Like, I really am. Like, she went to talk about Sirianni. I talked about Carson. What can I say? But, okay, so for those who want to get involved in the social media sessions, you know where to find us. At Stephen Burden 86, at Colts Nation 365, at No Horsing. Now, I do have a plea, you guys. Me and Zach have talked about this. He knows. If you want this sweet, sweet stuff, if you're on YouTube and you've got our lovely shirts, we're going to do a giveaway. We have 100%, y'all have shown out, we have 100% hit the followers on Twitter. I mean, we're over 800 now. It's insane. We want YouTube subscribers. We're at about 59 The deal with the giveaway is when we hit 100. So if you're listening to this and you're not subscribed, jump over there and hit the subscribe. Check it out. Zach always says, if you're more visual and you want to see us and you want to see Zach rocking that sweet shirt, you need to get onto YouTube and check it out. So do that. See if you can get involved. Like, we love getting you guys involved in the questions. We want to answer your questions. I don't want to just, me and Zach don't want to sit here and talk to the wall. We want to talk with you guys.
Yeah, man, I agree with that 100%, that sentiment. And the thing is that the one thing that I would like for people who listen to this podcast, especially religiously, to realize is that the more that you interact with us, the more that your voice is heard, because we can reach out to people like George Bremer. We're fans of Kevin Bowen. We can reach out to those people and we can get your voice heard. We can get your opinions out there, and it can actually be heard. Start on a smaller level, and we can make that come into real life. You can wake up one day, and if you're a fan of, a bigger media outlet, and you say, hey, man, I really wish you would try to have this guy on. Well, interact with us. Let us know what you think. Be a part of our show. Make it special for us, man. I mean, that's what we do it for. I always said this from the very beginning when I did my started podcast in 2018. As long as I have one person, that's listening to what I've got to say and interacting with me, this is worth it, man, because I love doing it. We're just two guys talking ball. But we do appreciate you. I know Steven does as well. Steven works very hard on Twitter. He's constantly pumping it out. I'm usually I'm the retweeter of the podcast, but man,
it's always appreciated.
He does a fantastic job. Like, share, subscribe, comment. And I'm just telling you right now, if you don't like what we're saying, you disagree with us, come at us, man. We're okay with that. It's just about a healthy conversation, and we all just want to, have our voices heard. And this is the place that you can come on. You can throw a Twitter question out. You can DM us. You can say, hey, man, I don't like your take on that, and this is why. And you know what? If you prove Stephen and I wrong in our opinions, we think that, hey, you know what? This guy's got a great point, or this girl's got a great point. We'll shout you out on this podcast, and we'll say, hey, man, we didn't see it this way. We thought about it. We talked about it. We thought, you know what? That's a great way of looking at this particular topic or player. But I always say this at the end. This podcast is for the people, of the people, by the people, and let's keep it that way. And just a big thank you, man. We're so grateful for all of the interaction that we've had. And go get that merch.
Oh, yes. Merch. And I was going to piggyback on one thing, too. It is because of the interaction we get from you guys. Zach already knows this, too. We get to expand. We get to do the merch. We get to do things like that. But the biggest, coolest thing, because of the interaction that we have with you guys, is me and Zach are able to now get some media availability to be able to talk to some of these players. Last week, I got to get in there and talk with a Michael Strong and Kylan Grayson and Will Fries and Marcus Brady and Eberflus. And it was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. But that's not done without you guys. That's not done without you guys interacting to where we are viewed semi-legitimately as much as you can be able to get in there, and the Colts organization trusts us enough to be able to talk with these players. And like I said, that's because of you guys. So, I mean, we're so thankful for it.
Absolutely, man. It's just been a pleasure having George on tonight. This was a fun one, Stephen, and I look forward, just continue at our journey through the off season. And as the season ramps up, we got some big plans and some other giveaways. Just a little hint, we're not going to get into that yet, but we got some really nice things that we're gonna have out there for you guys. So thank you so much again.
Absolutely. And as always, I love you. Zach loves you. We're out.